They started singing together at age 11. They ended up not speaking for decades. We now understand why Paul Simon wrote all the songs while Art Garfunkel got all the cheers when Simon finally lost it. He did something. He deleted Garfunkel's voice from their comeback album and put it out anyway, which is unacceptable. It as a solo project, but that wasn't what broke them, it was something else. Paul Simon was only 11 years old when he first met his father in 1953. I heard Art Garfunkel singing in a public school 164 fourth grade talent show. They lived just a few blocks away in Queens in an area that was mostly Jewish. They met a few years later in a sixth grade play of Alice in Wonderland, and they became close after that. I thought about whether the art was of the White Rabbit or the Cheshire Cat. Paul was smart, funny, and very likely the most interesting kid in their love because music brought them together so quickly. They would spend hours listening to the radio and taking in the new rock sounds. And roll, they quickly formed a small singing group on a street corner with some friends called themselves the Pep Ton, and they worked on harmonies and figuring out how well their voices went together, and soon they were singing together at school events. They had a link that would make them famous one day. In 1957, they were both 15 years old. They scraped together $25 to record a song called Hey Schoolgirl, and went to Sanders Recording Studio in New York City. Luck was on their side. A promoter named Sid Prozen heard them and liked what he heard, so he talked the boys' parents into letting him sign them to his own record label, Big Records. They went by the name Tom and Jerry A. They came up with the catchy alias after watching the cartoon, and they were thrilled when a famous DJ played their song on the radio. It ended up selling more than 100,000 copies and was even on a billboard. It even got them a spot on American Bandstand, which was a big deal back then, but that early spark didn't quickly turn into long-term success. The buzz started to fade after their follow-up songs didn't do well. It gave us a taste of how complicated the relationship between Simon and Garfunkel might be. Doesn't begin with their fame. It began with a painful event in 1958 that they would never forget. After they graduated from Forest Hills High, they both chose to go to college in case their music dreams didn't come true. Paul Simon went to Queens College to study English, and Art Garfunkel began with she studied architecture at Columbia University and then switched to art history at the time. They were still signed to Big Records as Tom and Jerry Garfunkel, but they used the name Tom Graff. He was calling himself Jerry Landis, but he did something that would shake up their friendship without telling Garfunkel that he put out a solo single under the fake name True. Taylor's song, True or False, came out in secret when Epic Records learned that he had written it. Simon admitted that he felt betrayed, and that feeling would come back many times over the years, even decades later. The memory still hurt, especially when he thought about how Garfunkel had once said, "No matter what happens, I'll always be." Years went by, and in the early 1960s, the folk music scene in the United States gave them a reason to get back together. It was a time when more polished pop music was taking its place. In 1963, 5 years after they broke up, they released raw, emotional folk songs. They quietly started to play again, but this time they didn't use their real names. They played in Greenwich Village at small venues under the name Kane and Gar. Like in Goethe's Folk City, when Tom Wilson, a famous African-American jazz musician and producer Wilson, saw them play. He saw something special in them and helped Bob Dylan move from folk to rock. Sent them to a studio to try out, where they played The Sound of Silence, a haunting song. Simon wrote the song in his bathroom with the lights off and the water running to get the right sound. They signed with Columbia Records under their real names and started over. Just at the right time, folk music was becoming more political and poetic. Simon was writing better songs, but their first official album didn't do well. Well, Wednesday Morning 3 a.m. came out in October 1964 and didn't sell very well. The label made a mistake and called it something else, but only 3,000 copies were sold. Folk music was getting exciting new sounds at the same time that the Beatles and other British bands were taking over. There were electric guitars and rock rhythms, and most of the songs weren't even Simon originals. The album felt like Simon moved to England to figure out what went wrong with his old-fashioned overnight. For the first time as a solo artist, Garfunkel went back to Columbia University to do some math. It looked like the end. Simon even made a solo album in London. They both thought they had moved on, but then something strange happened in the college radio stations in Boston and Florida began playing the original in the spring of 1965. Version of The Sound of Silence that Tom Wilson heard without asking the two of them. He decided to remix the song with studio musicians and added electric guitars, bass, and more. Added drums and bass to the original track, but the track wasn't smooth because the original had problems with tempo, and the session musicians had a hard time keeping time. Roy Haley, an engineer, had to use echo effects to hide the fact that the rhythm in September, while Simon was on tour in Denmark, he found out that the remixed song was climbing the US charts. When he heard it for the first time, he was shocked and thought people didn't like how messy and awkward it sounded, but the song went to number 1 on January 1, 1966, after being at the top of the charts for 14 weeks 100% of the time. Simon and Garfunkel became famous all of a sudden. Sounds of Silence riding the wave were forced to work together again to make a new album. Of a surprise hit in October 1966, Simon and Garfunkel put out there they took a big step forward with their third album, Parsley, Sage, Rosemary and Thyme. It stayed on the Billboard charts for almost 3 years and sold more than 3 million copies. For the first time they used an 8-track recording system to make 1 million copies, which made it possible for them to layer their vocals without Paul Simon's guitar sound getting in the way. A much better sound, but there were also some problems behind the scenes. The song, Scarborough Fair, was based on an old English folk song that Simon knew. Learned from a musician named Martin Carthy, even though it was a very long time ago old song that only Simon and Garfunkel were credited for another song called He Wrote the Seekers with Bruce Woodley and got paid, but he didn't get a praise for the album despite all of that. It was a big hit. Years later Rolling Stone named it one of the best albums of all time and added it to the Grammy Hall of Fame. Magazine says that Simon and Garfunkel played at the Monterey Pop Festival was a big cultural event with artists like Jimmy I. Chris Hendricks, Janet Joplin, and The Who stole the show while others smashed played guitars and set them on fire. Simon and Garfunkel stood out in a new way. People liked how their soft, thoughtful sound took them back to their folk roots in the middle of all the chaos and psychedelia. People thought their music wasn't cool enough at the time, but their show showed they were still important. In the same year that the music scene was changing, something unexpected took place that they both knew it would change their careers, and Mike Nicholas's world was when he was working on The Graduate. He had an instant desire to use songs by Simon and Garfunkel instead of a traditional soundtrack. Paul Simon agreed at first to write 3 new songs because they were on tour at the time, so the movie's editor just used cutting between scenes of songs like The Sound of Silence and Scarborough Fair. They kept the movie and the music because they thought it went so well together. Other Up, the soundtrack was a huge hit that even beat the Beatles on Mrs. Robinson's new song for the movie went on to win the charts. Record of the Year, and their music helped make the movie powerful. Return the movie brought Simon and Garfunkel to the attention of more older people this way. To many filmmakers will be inspired to use popular music in their movies in the years to come, but there are cracks in all the success. We're beginning to show that the two's working relationship was becoming less stable. Simon wrote all the songs and made most of the creative choices, while Art Garfunkel mostly worked on later, singing. Simon said that he felt the imbalance while the record was being made. Garfunkel would often sit in the control room and give feedback, but Simon did most of the work. Lifting this caused Simon to feel angry, as he once admitted. Envious when people cheered loudly for Garfunkel singing on songs like Bridge, while he was on Rough Water. He thought, I wrote that song, but it was Garfunkel who got the cheers. That anger went back to when they were kids. His mother had told him, "You have a good voice, Paul, but Arthur. She has a beautiful voice." It hurt. The tension grew as time went on, but it didn't write any of the music, but he felt like Simon was taking the spotlight. Simon and Garfunkel felt creatively stifled in January 1969. Around the same time that Art Garfunkel made a choice that changed everything, they were getting ready to record what would be their last album. For everything, he and Paul Simon had been cast in the movie Catch-22, by Mike Nicholas, but Simon's part was unexpectedly cut from the script. Started on January 13 in Guaymas, Mexico, with only Garfunkel in the cast. Sharon was left alone in New York, and they later hurt director Charles Grodin. When their relationship started to fall apart, they called this, "You don't take Simon and play a different role," he told them, "You just don't do that." Simon wasn't upset about the movie, he was upset about being left behind. He finally talked to someone he had been best friends with for years and told them what he was going to do. Simon didn't like the idea of watching movies for 6 months and then coming back to record albums. In the documentary, he talked about how he told Garfunkel that in his restless dreams. "Actually no, that's not going to happen, I'm not going to do that," Simon told me. He already did most of the work on their music, he wrote all of their songs, oversaw the recording sessions, and shaped their sound. Garfunkel mostly sang and told Simon what was going on in the control room. It looked like the partnership wasn't fair anymore, and this movie made it worse. Even worse, Garfunkel's 6-week film shoot turned into a months-long one. Making things while he was stuck in Mexico, Simon tried to move the album Bridge Over Troubled Water, but working together from far away didn't work out. Gary would send back notes instead of songs from Simon. It wasn't the same. The weight made everything feel off, and Simon had to finish parts of the album without Garfunkel on some tracks. Garfunkel doesn't show up much on other songs, nowhere at all on one of them. The Only Living I wrote a letter to Garfunkel called Boy in New York as a way to say goodbye. To get your plane right on by using their old stage names as a guide. I'm sure your part will go well this time. Fly Down to Mexico, that song showed how alone you felt. And how far apart they had grown, not just physically but also. I felt sad too when Simon and Garfunkel sang their famous song, Bridge Over in Troubled Water Live. Something happened that Paul Simon always felt bad about. The crowd cheered and jumped to their feet when they heard Art Garfunkel sing the sad, high-pitched part of the song. The cheers were wild and loud, and they were full of praise, but it was all for nothing. I wrote that song in 2024 because Simon always had the same mean thought. In the documentary Restless Dreams, Simon is honest about how painful there were times when he gave Garfunkel the lead vocals on purpose because he thought Garfunkel's clear choir-like voice would work great for it, but it still hurt. Over the course of those performances, people praised the voice they heard more than the person who wrote the music and lyrics. Kept reminding people that he was the writer in the background while Garfunkel got all the attention. Simon's anger wasn't new, it went back to his childhood, he remembers. His mother told him something that would stay with him forever. "Paul, your voice is nice, but Arthur's is better," she told him. He felt like he was always second best after that sentence. If someone said nice things about Garfunkel's voice, that old comment would come up again, and as Simon watched their fame grow in the late 1960s, when he was writing all of their songs. The fact that Garfunkel got more praise than he did became too much for him to handle. Garfunkel had his own problems, too. In an interview, he said that Paul he had wanted to write for a long time, but Simon got in the way. Too, but he felt left out, so he said he never even tried to add his songs. During the years they were a duo, he didn't say anything because he didn't think they could beat Sean's about it and didn't start writing and putting out his own music until decades later. In the film, he asks the tough question, was he the one who broke up the group, or was Simon the one who never made room for Garfunkel's own goals? He thought that both of them were to blame, and in the end, Simon admitted that he wrote the songs and led the band, so their partnership was never fair. During the recording sessions, he made most of the choices about how the guitar parts, vocals, and other instruments should sound. The drums person stayed in the control room most of the time while the producer gave Things Got Worse while Bridge Over Troubled Water was being recorded. He liked the music, but he didn't change it much. Garfunkel quit to be in the movie Catch-22, and the filming took longer than as expected. Simon got angry when Garfunkel couldn't come back in time to finish the album. The delay made the creative in the summer of 1970. The tension and imbalance between them all added up at something quiet but important took place at Forest Hills Stadium in Queens, New York. Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel were on stage together for what the crowd didn't know that this night would be their last show together. One of music's most beloved partnerships came to an end. The show was polished and professional, but there wasn't much to feel in the air. Something far away and missing. When they talked between songs, the usual warmth and jokes between them seemed to have gone away. Disappeared after the second night, they just said goodbye to each other. There wasn't a big fight or public announcement, just a quiet, private goodbye that felt it was more like shutting a door than slamming it. Later, Paul Simon said that they never really talked about ending the act. It ended with Artie, there's no reason to talk about it, he said many years later. That sentence alone says a lot about there was no way for them to talk to each other before they stopped singing together. Maybe they both knew something. They couldn't keep going the way they were. Maybe it was easier for them to stay quiet than to say how they really felt after the breakup. They went in different directions with their lives. Paul Simon jumped right into his solo career with both feet. He did well with his early albums in the 1970s, like Paul Simon's There Goes the Neighborhood. Ryan Simon and I, who are still crazy after all these years, were full of new energy. And new songs, such as 50 Ways to, and Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard. When Leave Your Lover became a hit, people realized Simon wasn't just a part of a great duo, he was a strong songwriter on his own, and his creativity kept running wild. Moving forward, he released Grace Ann in 1986, an album that mixed South African. He made music in his own style that won more Grammys and sold millions of copies. Awards. It wasn't just successful, it was a first for Art Garfunkel on the Had a Harder Time, though. His voice was still beautiful, but his solo music didn't do as well, and he put out a few albums in the 1970s, but none of them were as good as what he and Simon had made. His music career slowed down. More scattered, and even though people loved his voice, he had a hard time finding that he wasn't done making magic on his own, but the spotlight moved on. Oddly enough, Garfunkel's acting career worked out better than expected. Critics have said good things about his work in both Catch-22 and Carnal Knowledge. People who saw him said he was a natural actor with a strong presence. Years later, Simon said he was angry about all the attention Garfunkel got. One biography quotes him as saying that everyone said Artie had a lot of you had so much talent and feeling, and you even told him how good-looking he was. After making so much music together, Simon's words showed how upset he was.